They say the river remembers, but it never forgets the price of life. This is the story of Adumu-Orubu, the boy who became more than flesh, more than legend, the boy who became the river. When shadows came to swallow the Niger Delta, he stood between life and death, not with power, but with sacrifice. He gave his name so the river could keep its own. And even now, if you listen to the tide, you can still hear his heart. Like, subscribe and hit the bell button for more African folktales.
Whispers from the creeks.
The night Adumu-Orubu was born, the sky burned red. The blood moon hung low over the Niger Delta like a molten ember, and the river fell into an eerie silence, as if the water spirits themselves waited. In the heart of Ogbejo, a village of winding grooves and restless tides, the village priest stood before the birthing hut, his cowrie-covered staff vibrating in his grip. "The sign is clear," he murmured, voice carrying the weight of prophecy. A child of war has stepped into the world. Inside, the cries of a newborn cut through the heavy night. Adumu-Orubu came with clenched fists and eyes wide open. His first breath deep and fierce, more like the growl of a hunter than the cry of an infant. His mother, exhausted but smiling, named him Adumu, he who stands unbroken. That same night, a fisherman named Perekeme claimed he saw a lone canoe gliding down the rivers without oars. In it sat a towering figure, crowned in shells, holding a spear that shimmered like the moonlight on water. When he blinked, it vanished, but the river hummed softly as though whispering the name Adumu. By the time Adumu turned 5, a pale silver scar bloomed on his arm in the shape of a wave. No one recalled an injury. The priest declared it the Igbesu's claim, a mark of the war god himself. By the time Adumu turned 7, the scar on his arm had become the subject of whispers in every corner of Ogbejo. Under sunlight it was faint, almost invincible, but under moonlight it shimmered like ripples on water. The old women called it Orerepolo, the river's kiss. The warriors spoke of it in hushed tones as Igbesu's claim. Okoribi, the village priest, watched the boy closely. He had seen many omens in his years, but none carried the same weight as this child. One evening, as the tide swelled and the mangrove roots groaned under the pool of the river, he summoned Adumu to the Igbesu shrine. The shrine stood half hidden in a cluster of mangroves, its walls of woven reed covered in red clothes and carved symbols. Smoke of burning herb curled upward, carrying the thick, sharp scent of river clay and palm oil. Okoribi knelt beside the sacred drum and beckoned Adumu closer. "Do you know why you are different, child?" the priest asked, his voice deep, echoing softly in the small shrine. Adumu shook his head but did not look away. Even at 7, his eyes were steady. "The river marked you before you were born. You were chosen not for ease, but for burden. One day the delta will bleed, and the spirits have chosen you to be its shield." Adumu touched the scar on his arm. It tingled under his fingers. "Will the river help me fight?" he asked. Okoribi smiled faintly, his lined face softening. "The river gives power only to those willing to pay its price. You must learn its language, its anger, its silence. When the time comes, it will speak to you." That night, Adumu dreamed of water, endless, black water stretching beyond sight. A single canoe floated on it, empty except for a spear of light resting across its seat. When he woke, the scar burned, and the river outside hummed like it knew its name. Years passed, and Adumu grew into a strong, weary youth. By the age of 12, his arm carried the strength of someone twice his years. his body molded by paddling against fierce river currents and hauling heavy nets from the dark waters. The scar on his arm no longer shimmered faintly. It glowed whenever the moon touched the river, a silent reminder that his destiny was not his own. But while Adumu's strength grew, so too did the dangers around Ugbejo. The delta was restless. Rumors spread of slave raiders moving through the creeks like shadows, taking men, women and children under the cover of the night. Villages disappeared, their fires left smoldering and their canoes adrift, empty in the tide. And beyond the raiders were whispers of rival clans forming alliances, hungry for the fertile fishing water Ugbejo called home. One evening, as the village gathered for a moon festival, the drums were interrupted by a single horn blast. Perekeme's canoe slid into the dock, the fisherman's face pale under the torchlight. "They have taken Opuruza," he said, voice shaking. The raiders came at dawn, no survival. A heavy silence gripped the crowd. Opuruza was a sister village barely a day's paddle away. If they had fallen, Ugbejo could be next. Ukuribi stepped forward, his staff striking the earth. The shadows gather. The river warned us of this day. His eyes found Adumu, standing among the young men. The mark had awoken for a reason. That night, the village council met in the shrine. Adumu sat outside listening to the low, urgent voices within. For the first time, fear touched his heart, not for himself, but for the river he loved, the people who had raised him, the world he knew that now trembled. As the council debated, the tide began to rise unnaturally fast. The water lapped at the edge of the village, whispering in a language Adumu did not yet understand. He turned to the dark river and for a heartbeat saw the same lone canoe from his dreams. This time the spear of light was gone. In its place sat a shadowed figure staring back at him. The night after the news of Opuruza's fall, Ugbejo did not sleep. The air was thick with fear and smelled of burning torches. Children clung to their mothers and the warriors sharpened their spears in silence. The council agreed. The boy marked by the river must be taken to Igbesu's shrine. If the war god had truly chosen him, the time to awaken that power was now. Okoribi came for Adumu before dawn. The priest's face was painted with white river clay, his staff wrapped in fresh clothes. "The river calls you, Adumu-Orubu," he said, his voice low but steady. "Tonight you will meet the one who waits beneath the water." They paddled in silence through the mangrove until the village disappeared behind the mist. The shrine rose from the swamp like a living thing, its woven walls covered in charms of bone and cowrie shells that clattered softly in the wind. The air here was heavy, even the river seemed to hold its breath. Inside the shrine was lit only by a dim glow of oil lamps. The floor was layered with sacred river sand, and the great drum of Igbesu sat in the center, its surface scarred from generations of ritual strikes. Okoribi mentioned for Adumu to kneel. "Place your hand on the drum." Adumu obeyed. The moment his finger touched the cool skin of the drum, the scar on his arm flared with silver light. A sudden gust of wind tore through the shrine, though no door had opened, and the river outside roared as if struck by thunder. A voice deep and rolling like distant wave filled the small space. "Blood of the Delta, child of the tide, you have been seen. When the shadows rise, so must you." Adomo's chest heaved as the sound faded. His eyes darted to Okoribi, but the priest was already bowing low, his forehead pressed to the earth. "You have been claimed," Okoribi whispered, his voice shaking. "From this day, you are no longer just Adumu. You are the shield of Ugbejo, and the river will demand everything from you." Outside, the water stirred violently as if something ancient had woken beneath the depths. 3 nights after the voice of Igbesu filled the shrine, Okoribi came to Adumu in silence. The priest's face was grim, his eyes holding the weight of something ancient. "It is not enough to be chosen," he said. "The river marks many, but only the worthy are kept. Before you can stand as Ugbejo's shield, You must pass the first trial. Adumu's heart beat hard in his chest, but he did not flinch. What must I do? Okoribi pointed to the dark waters beyond the mangrove. There is a place where the river bends deep and swallows light. It is there the Orubuzo waits, the guardian of the under river. You must meet it. You must return with his blessing, or not at all. That night under the waning moon, they paddled to the deep bend. The water was unnaturally still, the kind of stillness that makes even birds hold their breath. Okoribi stopped the canoe and placed a charm of woven reeds around Odumo's neck. When you see it, do not run. If you are afraid, you are already dead. Adumu slid into the black water. The cold gripped him instantly, pulling him into a silence so thick he could hear his own heart. He kicked downward, deeper and deeper until the world above was gone. Then he saw it. The Orubozo was massive, a serpentine creature with eyes like molten silver and scales that shimmered like moonlight on water. It circled him slowly, the water vibrating with his power. A voice boomed inside his head. Why do you seek the river's strength, child of flesh? Adumo's lungs burned, but his voice was steady, even in thought. To shield my people, to hold the delta against the shadows. The beast stopped for a moment. The river was silent. Then it opened its jaws and swallowed him whole. Adumo gasped, not for air, but at the sudden burst of light inside the creature. He floated not in water, but in glowing void. The voice came again, softer now. You are not afraid. Good. Fear cannot hold a shield. When the river spat him out, he crawled back into the canoe, shaking and gasping. The silver scar on his arm now burned like fire. Okoribi looked at him and bowed his head. The Orubuzo had named you. From this day, the river will answer when you call. Behind them, the deep bend rippled once and went still. The night Adumo returned from the first trial, the river carried his name. The waters lapped against canoes in rhythms that sounded like drums. The elders of Ogwejo knew the boy had crossed into destiny, but the delta was not at peace. Okoribi wasted no time. Ogwejo cannot stand alone, he told the council. The raiders come with fire and chains. If we fight divided, we will vanish like the smoke on the tide. The clans must gather. A message was sent across the waterways, carried by swift paddlers to every just settlement within reach. Days later, the Council of Clans met at Toroama, a sacred sandbar where no blood was ever shed. One by one, the war canoes arrived, their prows carved with symbols of fish, waves, and ancestral marks. Adumo watched in awe as leaders gathered. Ibiware, the scarred war chief of Baramatu, his arms like tree trunks and a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. Korubo, the cunning elder of Harubo, known for his sharp tongue and sharper mind. Tamara, the fierce young warrior of Ekubene, her oars still wet with river water from the long journey. Okoribi stepped into the center of the ring, his staff striking the sand. The river has spoken. The shield had been chosen, he motioned to Adumo. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A boy, barely 12 and marked for war. Ebiwere stood to his full height. Priest, you bring us a child while the shadows drag our kin into the dark. We need warriors, not humans. Before Okoribi could speak, the river itself answered. A sudden wave surged over the sandbar, though no wind stirred. The water circled Adumo's feet, glowing faintly. The scar on his arm burned like fire, casting silver light over the council. Tamara stepped forward, eyes wide. The river knows him. Silence fell. Even Ebiwere lowered his head slightly. The council voted that night. The clans would unite, and the boy marked by the river would lead their shield wall when the time came. As they departed, Okoribi leaned close to Adumo. You are no longer just a boy of Ogwejo. You are the Delta's breath, and soon the shadows will try to choke it. The Council of Clan had agreed. If the Jaw were to survive the coming storm, they needed more than courage and spurs. They needed vessels blessed by both man and spirit, canoes that could cut through the water like blades and carry the wheel of the delta itself. Okoribi led Adumu and a chosen group of master craftsmen deep into the mangrove heartland, to a place few dared to enter. Ebenioru, the black water grove. The water here was ink dark, and the trees rose like silent guardians, their roots twisting above the river like coiled serpents. The Oruwo canoes are not built, Okoribi said as they drifted into the mist. They are born. The craftsmen, men with arms hardened by years of carving sacred wood, set to work under the priest's chant. Each canoe was shaped from the massive iroko trees that grew at the grove's edge, their trunks said to be touched by ancestral hands. But the work was not ordinary. For every cut of the blade, Adomo laid his hand on the wood, and the scar on his arm flared silver, sealing the timber with river blessing. On the third night, as the final canoe was being hollowed, the water stirred. From the black depths, shapes began to rise. Not men, not beasts, but shimmering outlines of ancient warriors, their voices blended with the sound of paddles. These vessels are the river steeds, they intoned. Strike with them, and the delta will remember. When dawn broke, 5 Oru canoes floated silently in the water. Their hulls bore no carvings of men, only waves and fish scales. They were not adorned for beauty, but for power. Their curves made to move with the river's pulse. Adomo stepped into the first canoe. The wood hummed under his feet as though recognizing him. For a moment, he swore he saw the faint outline of Oruboso's eyes beneath the surface. Okoribi placed a hand on his shoulder. The river has given us teeth, he said. Now we must learn to bite. But far away beyond the mangrove, a different sound stirred. The creak of foreign chains and the low chant of men who did not belong to the delta. The shadows were moving closer. The Oruwo canoes had returned to Ogbejo, and with them a sense of power rippled through the village. But power is a double-edged paddle. It draws the gaze of both men and spirit. Tamara arrived with the dawn mist, her canoe cutting through the water with silent precision. The young warrior of Ekogbene had been restless since the council. That night she had dreamed of blood in the river and a silver scar sinking into the depth. When she stepped onto Ogbejo's shore, her face was hard, her eyes sharp as obsidian. Adomo was kneeling by the water, his hand resting on the prow of the lead Oru canoe. The scar on his arm pulsed faintly, as if the vessels breathed with him. Tamara approached without sound, her voice low when she spoke. You carry the river on your arm, boy, but do you know what weight that is? Adomo looked up, calm but curious. The river chose me, Okoribi said. I am the shield. Tamara knelt beside him, her hands brushing the cold water. A shield breaks first. That is its purpose, to hold so others can live. I saw it in a dream, Adomo. I saw you standing in a storm of blood, and when it was over, the river swallowed you whole. Her words struck him harder than any spear. He had faced the Orubozo without fear, but this was different. This was not the voice of a god or a priest. This was flesh warning flesh, a warrior seeing another's fate. He met her gaze. If that is the price, then I will pay it. Tamara studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Then let me stand beside you when the shadows come. A shield is only as strong as the spear beside it. For the first time since the council, Adomo silently smiled. Then we will fight together. Behind them, the Oru canoes rocked gently as if the river itself approved. But far in the distance, a thin column of smoke rose into the morning sky. A village was burning. The Oruwo canoe had barely touched water before the first whisper of trouble reached Ogbejo. Canoes from smaller settlements came drifting in, carrying frightened families and broken warriors. The raiders were moving with unnatural speed, striking villages before their drums could even sound alarm. Okoribi gathered the council in Egbesu's shrine. The firelight flickered across tense faces as he spoke. The river warns me of a shadow, not on the water, but in our midst. Someone feeds the enemy with our breath. That is why they strike so true. Adumu sat silent in the corner, the silver sky in his arm throbbing faintly as if it too sensed the weight of the words. It was Tamara who spoke, voiced what everyone feared. There is a traitor. That night, under the cover of mist, Adumu followed the river's hum. He had learned to listen to its subtle language, the soft lap against his canoe, the pulse in the current. It guided him away from the village, deep into a narrow creek where the mangrove closed overhead like grasping fingers. There, in the half-light, he saw him, a man kneeling in the canoe, whispering into a small drum marked with foreign symbols. Every beat of the drum sent a faint ripple down the creek, carrying messages no voice could. It was Tari, one of Ogbejo's own, a fisherman, quiet and trusted, the kind of man who blended into the background like an oar resting on a canoe's edge. Tari, Adumu said softly. The man froze, his shoulders trembling. Slowly he turned, his eyes wide with guilt and fear. I did it to save my family, he whispered. They promised safety, food, freedom. I never meant to. The river surged suddenly, a wave rising in the narrow creeks though there was no wind. The drum slipped from Tari's hand and vanished beneath the water. The scar on Adumu's arm burned hot, and for a moment his young voice carried something older than flesh. You have fed the shadows, now the river will feed on you. The water erupted, dragging Tari down in an instant, and the creek stilled. Only Adumu's canoe remained. He stared at the black water, his chest tight. For the first time, he understood the river's power had teeth sharp enough to cut his own heart. When he returned, Okoribi met his gaze and simply nodded. The first blood is always the heaviest. Remember it, more will follow. The morning after Tari vanished into the Black Creek, the river carried a new sound. The low, steady thump of drums, not the drums of celebration or warning, but the heavy, relentless rhythm of war. Ugbe just stared like a hive, warriors rushing to the docks, women gathering children and supplies, elders whispering prayers into the rising mist. Okoribi stood at the edge of the water, his staff sunk into the wet sand, his voice cut through the panic like a blade. The shadows are here. Stand, Ugbejo. The river watches. Through the fog, the first raider canoe appeared. Long, sleek vessels painted black and carved with strange sigils. Their paddles moved in eerie silence, faces hidden under clothes. Behind them, the smoke of burning villages rose into the grey sky. Adumu climbed into the lead-oar canoe. His scar blazed silver, and the wood beneath his feet hummed with river pulse. Tamara jumped in beside him, her paddle spear ready, her jaw clenched tight. Remember what I told you, she said, eyes locked on the approaching shadows. A shield break first. The raider struck like a sudden storm. The first clash came in the narrow channel just beyond the river, where water churned under the weight of paddles and bodies. Adumu felt the hurricane move with him, responding not to muscle, but to will. He struck with his spear, and the water seemed to carry the blow further than his arms could. A raider fell, his body swallowed by the river. The battle roared, spears clashing, paddles broke, the water turned the color of rust. Adumu fought with a focus he did not know he had. The scar on his arm burned so hot he could smell the faint scent of smoke rising from it. Every time he thought he would falter, the river seemed to lift him, pushing his canoe, guiding his strikes. By nightfall, the first wave of raiders broke and retreated into the mist. Ogbejo had held. Barely, the air was thick with smoke and the cries of the wounded. Bodies floated among shattered canoes, and Adumu sat in the blood-tinged water, chest heaving. For the first time, the weight of being a shield pressed on him like a stone. Okoribi waded through the shadows and placed a hand on his shoulder. You have seen it now, he said softly. War is not glory. War is the river taking what is old. Adumu stared at the horizon where the fog swallowed the last of the fleeing canoes. He knew this was only the beginning.